Hey, Al Scott here. If you've got a band, a business, a cause, or campaign, and you need stickers to help promote, check out thebumpersticker.com at thebumpersticker.com. They digitally print with solvent ink, so you get the photo quality results of digital with the strength and durability of old-style screen printing. I'm sure glad I sold thebumpersticker.com to Rick back when. He's made a hell of a great company out of it, and there are thousands of satisfied customers who agree with me, too. Let thebumpersticker.com help you get the word out. That's thebumpersticker.com at thebumpersticker.com. All right, y'all, Scott Horton Show. Check out the archives at scotthorton.org. Right around 14 years now. 4,400 and something interviews for you. scotthorton.org/interviews there. And all the stuff gets posted first at libertarianinstitute.org/Scott Horton Show. And then I'm doing the Q&A show on the whole show feed. That's at scotthorton.org/show. If you guys have questions, just tweet me, hashtag SHSQA. Or email me, scott@scotthorton.org, and I'll try to get to those for you. Got a brand new one I posted yesterday. Okay. Introducing Matthew Ho. He's a former Marine and former State Department official who heroically resigned in the summer of 2009 and leaked to the papers why. Wrote a big memo to the boss saying basically he was trying to stop Obama's surge, trying to give the American people someone to cite to say, this expert says we don't have to do this. And, of course, the whole thing was a bust, just got thousands of people killed for nothing, just like he said would happen. But anyway, he also is experienced in Iraq from Iraq War II, and he's become an anti-war activist and other kinds of activists, too, ever since then. Welcome back to the show, Matt. How are you, sir?
Good, Scott. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I said that all so nicely because I want a blurb for my book, dude.
Absolutely. My pleasure. My pleasure, man. Yeah.
That was me subtly manipulating you.
Yeah, of course.
Now you owe me a blurb.
I know. I will, do my best to be like Scott Horton's,
you know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking all the blurbs should say, this book is not wholly inaccurate, or,
yeah.
For a book by a guy who's never been to Afghanistan, this isn't too bad, I guess. Or, that kind of stuff.
Basically something along the lines like I actually finished reading this book, something on it.
Yeah, I made it to the end, and, it wasn't wholly terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't throw it against the wall or, exactly.
But then, see, have all those kind of like very deadpan sort of quotes, but then have them be by Ron Paul and Danny Davis and Matthew Ho and Patrick Coburn and Anand Gopal and all of my heroes, then that would be rad. Like this book, I could tolerate it. I mean, I don't know if I'd share it with somebody, but it's worth reading once, I guess, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm happy I didn't have to pay for it,
right.
But
he sent it to me in the email. What am I going to do? Not read it?
Exactly. Yeah, but it is kind of long. But I'm pleased. A lot of the pages are notes. So
that's true.
I don't have to read those.
Yeah, I think about 10% of it is footnotes, maybe more than that.
But that's great, though. I mean, in the sense of that, you see a lot of these books that come out now, Scott. Not to go on a tangent, but some of the stuff, there's no notes, or the no. I mean, it's just like, who are these people who are writing this stuff that just. Yeah. There's no documentation, and you see it. I see that more and more. Which
I think it's okay if you're Eric Margulies and you're writing War at the Top of the World. Then trust me, man, I was there. It's sort of good enough. But I'm a Texan. I wasn't a journalist in the war, and I wasn't a soldier in the war, and I've never been to Afghanistan. I don't speak a word of Pashto, and so we're gonna have to figure out something else. Like I read as much stuff as I could, and I interviewed a lot of guys. That's my experience with Afghanistan. I see if I can get away with that.
Yeah. With a lot of this stuff, Scott, I go back to that. What's the old line? I don't have to have been to the Grand Canyon to know that it's a giant hole in the ground.
There you go.
There's some things.
That's a good one. You know right? What? I think that quote might just go in my book right now.
Right? I mean, you don't have to have been to Afghanistan
to know it's a giant hole in the ground.
Exactly. To know that it's an absolute catastrophe, that it has been nothing but a tragedy, that the Afghan people have been suffering for decades, that it has just been a huge racket, a money-making racket for corporations, a policy disaster. I mean, however you want to describe it. You don't have to go there to understand that. I mean, all you have to do is read a few things. Yeah, it's amazing too. I just read another article from the New York Times the other day. The way people keep talking about, journalists keep talking about the resurgent Taliban.
Yeah.
You know, these phrases they keep using, the resurgent Taliban, the way they've been using the same phrases for 10, 12 years now. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it looks like as long as we're talking about Afghanistan, one of the last things I'm waiting on, I'm still working on some commas and stuff, but one of the last things I'm waiting on is the number. Because any day now, we've been saying for a couple of months here, any day now, Mattis is going to submit his official Afghanistan report to Trump asking for, we know already, at least 5,000 troops, because that's what, well, we don't know that, but presumably, since that's what the Afghan war commander, General Nicholson, has already asked for publicly. So we're only just getting started on Chapter 3 right now.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. To send them back into Helmand to fight the Battle of Sangin 3 or 4 or whatever. I mean, to redo all that stuff over again, just to kill more and get more American kids, become amputees and everything else, just to do what? Exactly.
All right, now wait a minute though. So here's the only and most important and best argument that I need to make sure I have covered right from my book anyway, and that really, if I'm right, then I'm right. If I'm wrong, then maybe there's a problem and it needs to be re-examined, kind of a thing. But here's the deal. It's the safe haven myth. That like, okay, Matthew Ho, look, dude, fighting a war for the Tajiks against the Pashtuns isn't really working out that well. Or, okay, your memo is right about that. But we can't leave, because if we leave, Al-Qaeda will come back. And in fact, we just saw a special operator was killed in Nangarhar province yesterday, or day before yesterday, fighting a group declared loyal to the Islamic State. And so now you're telling me we're going to leave right now when the baddest of the bad people were there, and you saw what a wonderful safe haven is for horrible anti-American terrorists, and we can't ever allow that to happen. So, you know what? Maybe we can't do a counterinsurgency pacification campaign, but maybe we do have to leave a garrison in Bagram Air Base forever to make sure that even if there are a couple Islamic State fighters around, there's nothing like the situation with bin Laden and friends in 2001.
Well, I think that the correct word is the word you used at the beginning of what you said there, Scott, is that safe haven myth. And it was a myth. I mean, we know from what the FBI said, from what guys like Ali Soufan said, or from what Peter Bergen has reported, that at the time of 9/11, the total strength of Al-Qaeda worldwide was between 200 and 400 people. And now look at the size of these groups, Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State or whatever. But, I mean, the most important safe havens that the 9/11 hijackers had were the flight schools, in Florida, the martial arts academies they attended. I mean, we had 9/11 hijackers in the United States for 18 months, almost 2 years before the 9/11 attacks. I mean, so the best safe haven they had was actually here in this country. The 9/11 hijackers were actually not even in Afghanistan for very long. They kind of, from everything I know, they went to, the ones that actually did go to Afghanistan went to meet bin Laden, to kiss the ring, basically. And that was it. And then the rest of their training occurred, maybe some in Pakistan, and then the rest of it was in Europe. They had meetings in Asia, Spain, and then, of course, all the things they did here in America. So this notion that for specifically 9/11, the safe haven, it's just an absolute myth. I mean, it really was something that never really existed, this idea that they utilized Afghanistan as this training ground to launch these attacks that killed 3,000 Americans. No, I mean, they were the leadership of Al-Qaeda was hanging out in Afghanistan. They had this really difficult, complicated relationship with the Taliban. And it seems that everyone you talk to, you get a different answer about what the Taliban was planning on doing with Al-Qaeda in 2001, whether or not they're going to kick them out, whether or not they were looking to hand them over to somebody, whether or not they were still friendly with them. Everyone seems to have a different answer to that. But this notion that Al-Qaeda actually needed physical ground, that, Tarnak Farms, where they lived in Kandahar, was a vital essence to the 9/11 operation or to any other type of operation they were going to carry out in the future, just simply isn't supported by the evidence or by logical looking at how these groups actually operate. So no, I don't believe the safe haven argument ever really had any merit to it. But it's emotionally good, right? If we're not there, they're going to do it all over again. They're going to come and attack us. So if we have to, it goes back to that old George Bush, Dick Cheney, Rumsfeld, we've got to fight them there, or we're going to be fighting them here in the streets type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but maybe you and me were both right about that all along, or for the whole time you thought that, or that kind of thing. I always did. But maybe now we're wrong. Because maybe now George W. Bush and Barack Obama have created so many jihadis in the world that now it really is a problem. Right at the time Obama was killing Osama, he was taking his side in Libya and Syria. And now look what happened. This whole freaking thing has exploded so far out of proportion all across the Middle East and North Africa. And again, you got guys declaring their loyalty to Baghdadi in Afghanistan. What if we left Matt Ho and Baghdadi and all his guys said, ha, we chased you out of Afghanistan because you're the weak paper tiger and we can keep attacking you and we're going to, and this kind of thing, like what right-wingers think?
Well, I mean, I think you could have that possibility. Sure, there's all kinds of things you can come up with, reasons and speculations you can come up with for what might happen. But we know what is happening, Scott. We know what has been happening, that our presence, and this predates 9/11. Again, we can go back and look at what the 9/11 attackers said, the hijackers said were their reasons for the attack. They attacked us because of our support for Israel, our presence, our military presence in Saudi Arabia, and our sanctions against Iraq, which were killing hundreds of thousands of people. Our actions in the Middle East, our military actions, our support for despotic governments, our actions against the people of the Middle East for decades have been fueling people's anger and have been pushing them towards terrorist groups. And some of them, a very, 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 very small minority, have joined groups like Al-Qaeda. So that's what we know has happened and is happening. So this speculation that if we leave, they're going to come chasing after us, waving their banners and shout, waving their black banners and shouting, we're the army of Muhammad and now we're coming after you. I don't know. Might it happen? Sure. Why not? Maybe, possibly. But what we do know is happening right now and has been happening for decades is that our presence in the Middle East has been causing this anger and in many, many ways justified anger that has fueled support for these groups. Let alone our actions, which have caused these wars, which are fueling these wars, which are arming these wars. Also, too, you look at the attacks, right? You look at the people who are actually conducting the attacks that we do have here, say in the United States or in Britain or in or in Europe. The majority of those attacks are caused by people who are from here, who are born here in the United States, or who have lived here for a very, very long time. They're not from the people who are refugees. They're not from the people who are coming on a plane over here yesterday. Those instances are incredibly rare. Very few. Again, the majority of those attacks are conducted by people who are native born or who have been here for most of their life. Mm-hmm. So again, the evidence just doesn't show that that's what has occurred or will occur.
Yeah. Well, and quite a few of those have cited America's continued occupation of war in Afghanistan as their motive for doing their crimes here in America anyway. Hey, did you see Lindsey Graham? I hate to make light of this at all, but I can't help it. It's worth bringing up. Lindsey Graham on the Tucker show the other day. Did you see that?
Oh yeah, because that's what I do. I have a Google alert for Tucker Carlson and Lindsey Graham, and so when
it was going around on Twitter.
That makes my day. I had that. I was waiting for that. No, of course I didn't watch that. No.
It was so good, though, because here's what happened. I mean, Tucker's no good on any of this stuff either. Like, he can kind of pick up on some of the contradictions, but he doesn't have any kind of real compelling narrative in his head for how to contradict Graham necessarily. But so they're both just kind of all over the place. But Tucker's saying, well, but you just said ISIS is the main enemy. And Graham says, yeah. And he goes, no, but you just said Iran is the main enemy, but they're fighting each other. And then so Graham is just melting down, basically trying to figure out some sort of coherent way to talk about this. And, Tucker didn't even bring up blowback. It was almost like Lindsey Graham's guilty conscience bringing up blowback. Or, in fact, the way he was kind of setting up the straw man in a way, or what he thought, anyways, the straw man, like, hey, look, you can't just not fight them. As though that was what Tucker was offering as the alternative, right? As though Tucker is you or me. Look, you can't just not fight them. After all, Graham said, we were attacked on 9/11, even though we didn't have troops in Afghanistan. And I just thought it was so great because, Tucker didn't pick up on it or anything like that, but he might as well have said, Horton is right. What can I say? It was the troops in Saudi Arabia. Everybody knows that. It was a bunch of Saudis, who were hiding in Afghanistan. But it was the troops. It's just... I mean, for him to hide, to kind of argue around the point like that, to me, was basically a full admission.
Well, I think, too, you do have to worry. You do have to wonder, does, Lindsey Graham, if you were to stop Lindsey Graham in the street, and ask him, were there Afghans involved in the 9/11 attack, he may not know. I mean, this is a man who I don't believe is smart. I mean, I have it's just an anecdotal story, but I know a guy who briefed him in Afghanistan one time, and he could not understand the difference between Helmand and Kandahar. He couldn't understand the concept of provinces. Like, he could not get that concept,
Provinces, like in Canada?
Yeah, like he just couldn't. Yeah, right. And so you have to worry. That these are the people who, and this is the man who, one of two, who every time there is an attack is always the spokesperson for our Congress. It's for whatever reason, it's always him or John McCain is who CNN and MSNBC and Fox and everyone else always puts forward, right? It's either Lindsey Graham or John McCain or the ones that the mainstream press is running to for a comment, even though you know what they're going to say. Maybe they're just trying to get something more outlandish or more aggressive or something, better than what they said last time. Maybe they're looking for. I don't know.
Right.
But yeah, I totally believe that that's what he said. That his line of thought is that, and the understanding, the understanding of the importance of troops in Saudi Arabia to what Al Qaeda was doing on 9/11 is just simply not there in Lindsey Graham's mind. But also, too, I don't think Lindsey Graham cares. I don't think. Yeah. I really don't think he cares. I don't think he cares for anything other than what's important to Lindsey Graham's personal arc of history, right? Where he sees his own political. He's got this view of himself as this defender of the United States somehow. As this great crusader for American virtue and values and strength across the world. I think he's got this view of himself that he's a psychopath, like a lot of these guys are. And I think that's what we're dealing with here with a lot of people who are in these positions of power. They have this view of themselves, and it manifests in various ways. And in cases like Graham or McCain, it manifests through this desire to use military force, as this manifestation of themselves, but as, really as a manifestation of who America is. And so it doesn't matter why they attacked us in 9/11. All it is an excuse to continue to do what we're doing. Yeah.
This part of the Scott Horton Show is sponsored by Audible.com. And right now, if you go to audibletrial.com/Scott Horton Show, you can get your first audiobook for free. Of course, I'm recommending Michael Swanson's book, The War State, The Cold War Origins of the Military-Industrial Complex and the Power Elite. Maybe you've already bought The War State in paperback, but you just can't find the time to read it. Well, now you can listen while you're out marching around. Get the free audiobook of The War State by Michael Swanson, produced by Listen and Think Audio at audibletrial.com/Scott Horton Show.
Well, and it really is something to really realize how ignorant, especially the most vocal war hawks are. Reminded of John McCain and his trip to Iraq in, I guess, 2007 or 8, where he's going on and on and on. I guess it was 07. On and on and on about how Al-Qaeda are going to Iran to be trained to fight, even though, of course, Iran was backing the Badr Brigade that America was backing against Al-Qaeda in Iraq, the major Sunni-Shia split. And at some point, he was going on so long that Joe Lieberman went ahead and stepped up next to him and interrupted the statement in order to whisper in his ear, the Iranians, they're training militants, okay? Militants. Don't say Al-Qaeda, because that's stupid. You know,
well, he said
after years of the Sunni Shia civil war in Iraq, and he still had no idea even that, like, in the West, that's the predominantly Sunni based guys in the insurgency, and in the East, that's where the predominantly Shia there toward Iran, right? He can't even picture that in his head, the difference and which side America is on, when it was pretty black and white at that time that we're fighting for the Badr Brigade. We think the Badr Brigade's fighting for us, but and you know, they couldn't even understand that. The worst war hawks in the Senate at the height of the thing didn't even know which side we were on.
Yeah. And it wasn't like you said. It wasn't like the Badr Brigade was one of the multitudes of smaller militias, and you're caught up in the minutia and everything else. I mean, this was the Badr Brigade. This was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, type of deal. I mean, and yeah, et cetera, et cetera. And they don't know, and they don't care, because it doesn't matter. But this is also the man, too, that just, a few days ago or last week, regarding the Russians, said, I don't care what the Russians say. I don't care about them. We're tougher. We're bigger than them. Well, I mean, like, just these remarks about the cavalier nature towards conflict with the Russians that John McCain continues to spout is just, it's horrifying. I mean, it's absolutely horrifying. And certainly these are people that have no business being in positions that they're in. And certainly if they continue to be in these positions, I'm afraid that we're going to be burying a lot of people. There are going to be a lot of mothers and fathers and young wives and young children, at gravesides, because of people like McCain and Graham. I mean, it's happening. It's still happening. It has been happening. It's still happening. And it's going to continue to happen, probably in greater numbers, if these men and women are continued to allow to conduct actions like they're doing without the American people stopping them. And of course, the suffering of the people in Syria and Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, et cetera, is just going to continue on in just such a manner that is just absolutely horrific. I mean, just in ways that we can't understand. I mean, the horrors there are just absolutely horrific. So,
yeah. Well, and I want to point out here, too, or remind the audience that when you say that, that's not just some rhetoric. I mean, you're a guy whose friends are dead because of these wars in real life.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that, I mean, it's an anger that I'll have and I will always have, and
I'm sorry to do that to you, but I just didn't want people to think that, oh, yeah, and then more people die, blah, 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 that this is very real stuff. This is not just a game. It's not just words. These are real corpses.
No, absolutely. And the same thing, too, when I say about the Iraqis and the Afghans, the same thing as well. I mean, I have issues with guilt over what I took part in Iraq and Afghanistan, the suffering, what we did to those people. I have, I speak about it publicly. I talk about my own suicidality, my own issues with that, thoughts of taking my own life because of the things I did in Iraq, as part of the war effort, things that occurred, things that you did, things that happened to people. I mean, it is very real, and it's still occurring. And so just the way that people discuss it, the way that people talk about it, or the nature of people saying that war is a dirty business, or things happen in war, or just again, the very cavalier nature of it. These are people who have not dealt with it, which is all the more surprising for McCain, because McCain is someone who has dealt with it, and McCain is someone whose son served in the Marine Corps over in Iraq, and whose son, I assume, probably had to go through some tough times over there, because I believe his son was in the infantry. So I am surprised that McCain is so cavalier, but also too, I think McCain is. I think there's something not right in McCain's head. I think the man is senile. I mean, I think the man there's something wrong with him, as well as the fact that I think he is a narcissistic psychopath like so many others in Washington, D.C., and nothing matters to him besides his own personal ambition and power and, his own personal victories. But yeah, I mean, it certainly is not a game. And, the suffering that occurs every day and has been occurring every day is just it's legion. I mean, it's countless. It goes on and on and on, and there really is no end in sight for it. And so this notion that somehow we're going to escalate, or that our military actions are going to bring about an end to it, when there is no evidence of that in the past of that working, there really is not. That makes that anger deepen even more.
Yeah. Hey, listen, I brought you on to talk about Palestine. We hadn't even started with that yet.
Yeah, right.
So, but I kind of want to at least give you a chance, if you want to address some of the PTSD stuff, because I know that not only have you had some problems with this, like you just said, but that, you've been working on it, and that you've been helping other people, and that of, you sent me an article before about some new techniques and things like this that are being used on soldiers to help you and to help other people that and this kind of thing. So, I know there are a lot of veterans and, in fact, active duty military guys who listen to this show, and a lot of them may be very interested to hear what you have to say about some of that stuff, because, of course, not just suicide, but a lot of, negativity short of suicide, to put it, euphemistically, takes place in this country as a result of all of this stuff. There's a lot of hardship for a lot of people, and it sounds like, I think, you've had some success in figuring out how to cope with this and how to help others.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, it does. It wrecks everything. I mean, it's just that there's this tension and this stress that does manifest as basically this negativity, this anger, this guilt, this sadness that manifests into depression, that then, of course, the substance abuse comes with it, whether it's alcohol or drugs or prescription meds or whatever. These are all things that, it damage and then wreck everything in its path. It destroys relationships. It destroys jobs, destroys intimacy. It destroys, financially. I know so many guys who dealing with the after effects of war who are financially in trouble right now. And they look around, they say, how did I get like this? And that's just something that happens. So there are so many levels to it. It becomes very complex. And then there's the other side of this. There's another element to this too, something that I've been experiencing, that a lot of us who served in Iraq and Afghanistan are suffering from neurocognitive disorders or traumatic brain injuries because of the explosive blasts. And these really are invisible wounds. If you put us into an MRI machine, you can't see on the brain the damage. But there is something wrong with we've got 85 billion neurons in our brains or whatever. There is something wrong with us. And for me, a couple of years ago, I started having some neurological problems. I started having some real bad migraines and exhaustion issues, as well as issues with memory and concentration. And I have some problems. It's interesting how it manifests. I'm still able to write and speak, but when it comes to doing rather simple tasks like copying and pasting things or moving things around on my computer, I tend to get overwhelmed really easily. It's a memory issue for me. And so a lot of guys are experiencing these things right now. I have a friend of mine who used to write computer code, went to Iraq, and now he can barely get words down on paper. Again, something that's manifested over the last couple of years. It's something that is similar. It's different, but it's similar to what football players and boxers are experiencing. That type of exposure to concussions that which manifests after time, like that buildup, that chronic buildup of damage. And so for many Iraq and Afghan vets, also too, a lot of this occurs in training because you're exposed to blasts explode. And I think that's where most of mine may have come from, was in training, because I was a combat engineer and did a lot of demolitions, did a lot of breaching. You know, when you stand next to the door with the explosive device right on the door and you blow the doorknob off the door and those kinds of things. We did a lot of that. And we're now learning that that can cause a lot of damage to the brain, things we didn't know 10, 15 years ago. So we're seeing more and more of that, and people are starting to learn more and more about that. Unfortunately, it's really hard to identify, and you can't really see the damage. There's no way to see it. So, and it manifests the same as PTSD and depression and some other things. But there are, one of the things, the VA treatment is, there was a big study came out last year on the VA suicide rates, and it was 20 a day kill themselves. And the numbers really are off the charts for veterans who are 18 to 29 years old. Their suicide rate is 5.5 times higher than their civilian peers. And we also know that for infantry units, for the few infantry units that have been tracked post-combat, we're seeing rates as high as 14 times. So for infantry battalions, after they come home and those guys get out, their suicide rates can be as high as 14 times that of their civilian peers. Now, the silver lining in all this, if there is one, is that if these veterans get into veterans health care, and if they go and they see doctors and they take part in the various treatment programs that are available to them, while the suicide rate for them is still higher than their civilian peers, it is much, much, much lower than those who are not enrolled in veterans health care. And so the VA, which has a lot of problems and has a lot of issues, it's grossly under-resourced. Most VAs are operating with patient loads 2 or 2.5 times or 3 times what they were designed for. If we get the veteran in there and they can commit to a program of therapy, things will get better. It takes a long time. And what I tell most people about recovering from war, and again, there's so many levels to this. There's the PTSD, there's the guilt and the moral injury, there's the substance abuse and alcohol abuse, there's the depression, there's financial insecurity, there's transitioning to new life, there's on and on and on, plus possibly these neurocognitive disorders and these traumatic brain injuries that we're now truly understanding. It's a lifetime of managing this. And we see this. We see this. We see this in World War II veterans. We in Korea War veterans. Time does not heal war wounds. It might heal broken hearts. It might heal things with relationships. It might heal other issues. But the research shows that war-related issues, war-related memories don't get better on their own over time. So this all goes to say that it's tough. It's really hard. And if untreated, it gets worse. And it usually ends up pretty bad. Usually ends up with homelessness, destitution, domestic abuse is very high. It ends up bad. But if you can get into treatment, and if there are wives and girlfriends and moms out there listening, I always say this to them because they're the ones who do this the best. You have to get them into treatment. You got to nag, you got to push them, right? You got to get them into treatment. And that's the key, is getting help. and understand that's going to take a long time, that this is not a 6-week process. It's not a 6-month process. It is most likely a lifelong process. It's unfortunate, but that's the way it works. That's unfortunately the way the brain works. That's unfortunately the way that we have to manage ourselves to get over the things that occurred in war. In my case, the PTSD, specifically the startle reflexes, the reactions to basically what you have is with PTSD specifically, with the post-traumatic stress disorder, Scott, what you have is a way I like to describe it for people is that you have a Marine or a soldier. He goes to Iraq or Afghanistan for 8 months, 9 months, a year. His job is to leave his base every day and hunt for somebody while other people are hunting for him. His survival system is turned on. Now, that survival system was created in our bodies so that we could fight the saber-toothed tiger every now and again for a short period of time. It's not meant to be kept on for 9 months or for a year like it is. So what happens is it breaks. It gets stuck open. And when that young man or young woman comes home, that survival system is stuck on. It's pumping all these survival chemicals all the time. So there's that's what they have to deal with. Everything is always tense. Everything is always on. Everything's always aggravated. And there's ways you could deal with that. For me, the biggest problem was the guilt, was the what they call moral injury. And, as like I said, a lot of good doctors have helped me and, getting past all that and now dealing with some of these neurological problems, which again, you get some good doctors and they help you and, you accept it and you figure it out and, you keep moving forward.
All right. Now, a couple things here real quick. Not to lecture anybody or anything, but yeah, in 2002, the message was, oh, yeah, no, don't worry. This is going to be great. In fact, one of my childhood friends was in the Army then. I talked to him on the phone, and he goes, yeah, you just don't understand. George W. Bush is doing some really good things for the military right now, and meaning the grunts were getting a raise, and he was not Bill Clinton. So great. And the whole message was unstated, but it was there, that even though you have all just spent the last 25 years looking at Vietnam veterans begging on the side of the road, this time it's going to be different. Yeah. Even though we were already more than a decade into this will not be another Vietnam, the war against Iraq, this will not be another Vietnam. We're going to go in there, we're going to get Saddam and get out. That's what everybody was saying. We're going to go in there and get Saddam and get out. And so the whole thing about, yeah, it's true, you've seen homeless Vietnam veterans on the road on the side of the road your entire life long, still in their army jackets. But don't worry about that. Dismiss that. Don't consider that, because that and this are just entirely separate issues. And now look at us here in 2017, when the stuff that you just described, you're talking about millions of people who have gone. I mean, I don't know how many hundreds and hundreds of thousands. I think millions have been combat vets in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places, for that matter, over this last decade and a half and more of war.
Yeah, they have. We have the Iraq and Afghan vets. There's this misconception that most people don't see combat in Iraq or Afghanistan, when the reality is, every study I've seen, I've looked at over 10 of them, done by universities, the RAND Corporation, National Institute of Health, the VA, et cetera. Iraq and Afghan vets have the highest exposure to combat of any veterans going back to the First World War. But depending upon the study, between 60 and 80% of Iraq and Afghan vets have some form of exposure to combat. That can mean being shot at. That can mean seeing a dead person. That can mean, seeing your friend getting shot or killed. I mean, there's all different levels to it. But, we have the high, and that's because of the nature of the conflict. That's because of the nature of the war. That's because of the nature of how things were set up over there. Also, too, the fact that so much of the logistical work has been contracted out, so you don't have those that support element is now done by contractors or civilians, where in the past, say in Vietnam or even in the Gulf War, you had uniformed personnel doing that work. But certainly, Scott, I was under that misconception. I was just had those thoughts as we were going into the Iraq War, was that we're not going to make the mistake again. Look, I have on my shelf, when I was a second lieutenant, 2 of the books I read as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps, The Best and the Brightest by David Halberstam and A Bright Shining Lie by Neil Shaheen, 2 of the best books about the Vietnam War and 2 of the best books I feel about American government and American history, that described so well the lies about the Vietnam War and about the decision-making process by the American government based on those lies that got us into Vietnam and prolonged the Vietnam War. Those were books that were on the Marine Corps' required reading list for officers. So this was stuff our generals were saying to us in the Marine Corps, that we're not going to make this mistake again. Don't worry about it. Vietnam was let alone everything else. We're not going to make this mistake. You can trust us. Let alone the society saying, don't worry, we're not going to do the same thing to you that we did to the Vietnam vets. We're going to take care of you guys. And absolutely, we just walked right back into it. What are we going to do? I have to take some of the blame for that myself, for being naive enough to believe it, right? But we did. We walked right back into these wars. These wars are still going on, and we trusted these people, and these wars are still going on. And we trusted them again that they were going to take care of us. And guys are putting guns in their mouth all the time and blowing the back of their heads off because they can't deal with what happened in those wars. And, they're not, meanwhile, they're not getting the help that they need at the level they need. The VA hospitals are under-resourced. My hospital, which has got, again, my doctors here in Durham at the Durham VA are terrific. But if I was to call right now and say, hey, look, I'm a veteran, I fought in Iraq, I'm not doing so well, I need to come in and talk to somebody, it would take me 114 days to get in to see somebody.
Yeah.
You mean that's where we're at right now?
Okay, so talk to me about then the groups of veterans who are just helping each other anyway.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of guys, there's a lot of it. You see a lot of it. Some of it's informal and some of it's formal. And that's where there's this problem, right? Because you can get online and Google it and you just see all these different veterans groups. One thing I've seen a lot of is on Facebook, and I know of different units have done this. They come home and they form these Facebook groups or maybe Google groups or whatever they do, or I don't know, maybe they're on, I don't know, whatever, and they're younger. So they're on, I don't know, whatever it is they use now. And, but this way they keep tabs on each other because they come home, they separate from the Army or the Marine Corps, and then they go back to Kansas and Washington and Florida or wherever they're from, Detroit and Topeka or whatnot. And this is how they keep tabs on each other. And some of them go so far as they make each other check in every day with one another to make sure that they're doing okay. Because that's what they need to do to keep alive, to keep going, to keep moving forward. And you're seeing more and more of that type of informal, because one of the things, Scott, that's interesting, if you look at the suicide rates for active duty service members, it's higher than it is for civilians, but not very much, right? But if you look at, of course, the suicide rates for veterans, people who have separated from the military compared to civilians, and the younger, and then, of course, those who have been in combat, the rates are off the chart. And, the idea, the assumption is once you leave the group, once you're out of that bubble, that's when the problems come on you. That's when you lose your support. That's when also, too, there's this understanding, too, that PTSD, traumatic brain injury, the moral injury, the guilt, these are all things that manifest with time. There's a latency that comes with them. For whatever reason, there's a delayed onset with them, particularly the traumatic brain injury. the neurocognitive disorders, also too with the moral injury and the guilt, there can be a real delayed onset with them. So it may not hit you until you're out of the service for a couple of years anyway, when all of a sudden, bam, you get hit with this stuff. So you're seeing these young men and women who are banding together to try and help one another because they're not finding it anywhere else, or they're going in to get help and they're not being able to get in because the VA is overwhelmed because it takes them 3 months to see a doctor, and then like anyone else, they go to the VA, they don't want to go because they're stereotypical. These were the kids that we recruited for the infantry. These are the ones who need the most help or whatever. These are the kids that we told were tough. We told that they were exceptional. We told that they were, and every time they go to a baseball game, they're told to stand up so we can applaud them because they're heroes. Every time they go someplace, they're told they're a hero. Every time they go someplace, they're told that they're exceptional and they fought for our country and they protected us and everything else. But inside, they're breaking down. Inside, they're having all these problems. Inside, they may be, like a lot of us, again, have these horrible guilt issues about what they did, what they saw, what they took part in. And so now they're trying to go get help. They're having frustrations getting help. And so when they go to get help, they're looking for any excuse not to get help, right? So they run into a wall and they turn around right away. So again, they're turning to one another because that's what they know, that's what's comfortable, and it does help. But again, you're dealing with serious medical problems here that require professional help. So it is good that they turn to one another, but they really do need to get in professional care.
Right. So, the point being here that, you think about how cavalierly they talk about what to do in Syria. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. And it's just sort of presumed that any old soldier or Marine loves it. And that, all they're just pit bulls on a chain, man. All we got to do is let them go. And this is what they're all about. Doesn't matter what the mission is. All they want to do is go on it, as though these aren't, this is part of, Chris Hedges had said, back years ago, war is a force that gives us meaning, about how we treat soldiers and Marines, whatever, troops, as these golden idols, and we put them up on such a pedestal. Well, we're dehumanizing them all the same, just the same as calling them a Haji. We're making them kind of so separate and different from us. Like, they ought to be able to just drink a beer and get over it because of what tough guy heroes they all are and whatever, like you're just saying. And so they end up neglected, when really it's just the neighbor kid who George Bush put over there in some insane situation. There's a movie like this that's out right now. It's on the Pirate Bay for people. I forget the young man's name, His Long Halftime Walk, it's called.
Oh, yeah,
It's based on a book and a true story. And this kid, hand-to-hand combat, ended up killing an Iraqi, but who's trespassing on whose property? And yeah, he was heroically trying to save his sergeant, but who was trespassing on whose property? And so he's totally torn. He killed this guy with his bare hands. And here he's like, oh my God, I'm going through all this. And at the same time, they're like, yeah, you're the prop at the Super Bowl. And we're going to set off all these fireworks and we're going to have Beyonce dancing. And it's like the most crass Pepsi commercial, for this week's lingo, kind of exploitation of this poor kid, like he's this superhero when he's just the neighbor kid. And yeah, I can see why people end up not being able to handle this when they're left alone, basically so excluded from all sides.
Well, and killing in our society is so commonplace in terms of our culture, our society, our movies, our video games. Last year, the National Center for Veteran Studies at University of Utah looked at 22 studies that examined the relationship between killing and between combat and suicide. They threw out one of the studies, but they found that the 21 remaining studies, all 21 found a significant relationship between being in combat and then committing suicide. And then they found that relationship deepened the more you were exposed to killing, whether you were directly involved in killing or not. So whether you directly did the killing or you were indirectly involved with the killing, it didn't seem to matter. But the closer you were involved to it, the more proximity you had to killing or to atrocity. And atrocity is defined however you want to define it. I mean, atrocity could be 35 dead people or just one dead person. And I've seen enough of it to know, just the dead eyes of one little kid is enough atrocity. I mean, so, but that's what the reality is. I mean, so we send these young men and young women over there and they take part in killing. They take part in this killing experience. And they come home and they're not right any longer. It's not right. They have violated all kinds of moral codes. And then, too, on top of it, like you said, Scott, we're invading someone else's land. We are fighting people who are defending their own land. It doesn't take you very long to be over there to realize that you're the occupier. It doesn't take you very long to realize, looking into the faces of the people around you, that you are the occupying army. You don't have to have that much of a brain in your head to get it. I used to say it all the time when I had my company in Iraq. I had 153 Marines and sailors. And look, in 2006, if my young men were Sunni males, of those 153, a third of them would have been dead, a third of them would have been in Abu Ghraib, and a third of them would have been fighting us. Because they were the same type of young men as those young Sunni males that were fighting us in 2006 and 2007 in the Euphrates River Valley there in Anbar. And so it doesn't take much to understand that. And so you come home, you take part in that, you participate in this killing. You can call it whatever you want. You can use whatever terms you want to use it. You can call it kinetic activity or whatever nonsense. They say, the generals and the public spokespeople say, and the think tank people on TV say, or whatever, and you can watch your friends play Call of Duty and everything, but it's still never the same. And then particularly when it involves the civilians, and that is something that you can never, ever shake. And also too, it doesn't have to just be killing. It can also just be the terror that you put in people. When we conducted raids and went to people's houses, the terror that we put in people, the terror that we put into women and children because we went into their homes with our guns up and everything, that's something that will never leave me. That's something that will never, ever, ever leave me. And that's something that other guys talk about too, what we did in terms of terrorizing people when we went into their homes. You now come back a different person. You went over there, you joined the military, you were raised as a certain person with certain moral values, with a certain moral fiber, with certain moral pillars. You thought of yourself as a good man or a good woman who was always going to protect somebody, who was going to do the right thing. And then you go and do that. And everything collapses inside of you. Everything crumbles.
I knew a guy who he had PTSD. He said he was a wreck. And then it turned out that what was really killing him was the dissonance. Because in the back of his head, there was a real him buried down in there somewhere screaming that this is wrong. And he said it wasn't until he got home and this PTSD was just wide awake nightmares all damn day. He couldn't get over it until he finally admitted to himself. That was the key, that, I was the occupier. That was the insight. I wasn't helping the people. I was the bad guy. I was the stormtrooper. They were the innocent civilian of Tatooine who I was terrorizing. But the realization was what freed him. And he went, okay, what I did was wrong. Now I understand it. Now I'm not tearing myself apart trying to rationalize this crap anymore. And then, he dedicated himself to anti-war activism after that to try to help make it right.
Yeah.
That was what freed him, was that he stopped lying to himself about what it was that he had just been a part of.
Yeah, and you exactly. But the thing is too, you come home though, and like you said, you go, you're at the hockey game, and they want you to stand up so 17,000 people can applaud you, and you're thinking to yourself, for what I did, for the things that I did, for the people I terrorized, for the things I took part in. So there's that. It really is. It's a horrible, horrible thing. And if you don't get help, if you just try and suppress it, or if you do like I did, deal with it with alcohol, self-medicate, it just it spirals, and then the suicidality comes, and then I was a mess. I stayed in everything, and went to the State Department and went to Afghanistan and thought I was going to help end the war there by being a political officer in negotiations. And of course that didn't work out, and come back, and then I'm trying to end the war, and I'm still not getting help, and just trying to drink my way through it and everything. Yeah. And that is, a surefire way to make things much, much worse and destroy everything around you, and that's why I say you got to get help. You have to, once you have the realization that you have these problems, the next step has to be to get help. That's what you have to do, not just for yourself, but for everyone around you, because you will destroy everything around you. Everything you value, you will destroy. That's the nature of war. That's what war does. War comes home with you. And everything you destroyed over there, everything you took part in destroying, all the suffering, you bring it home with you. It's this contagious disease. It's this vermin. It's however you want to describe it, but it comes home with you, and you destroy things with you. It's, the Romans and the Greeks, Scott, they had, gods for everything. And sure enough, yeah, there's a god for war for really good reason, because it was a force that was greater than mankind, and it existed. Mars, and he existed, and it's true. You go to Iraq or Afghanistan, it comes home with you. You can't leave it there. Maybe some people can, but I think they have other problems than themselves, or they were in a position where they were able just to, stay focused on something, or they've got some special circumstances. But for most people, I don't know how they can come home and say that they didn't bring it home with them, because most people do.
Yeah. All right. Now, I don't want to promote this as some kind of silver bullet or magic cure. And even worse, I'm kind of afraid that the side effect of this is that they're going to be able to get away with more and more in the future. That is having some kind of cure, like a pill, or this thing that we talked about before, the shot in the brainstem. That if you could talk a little bit about that to help reduce these feelings of guilt and all that. That from the Pentagon's point of view, this double-edged sword, this new technology, is that they can make some guilt-free super soldiers in the future if they can figure out this whole brainstem thing. But on the other hand, what's important in the immediate future is that people like you, have the ability to get a little bit of relief. I don't know how much, but this sounds like a pretty big breakthrough. Can you talk about it?
Yeah. There's a nerve block I've received. It's called the stellate ganglion nerve block, and it doesn't affect your guilt. What it affects is what it can help with is those involuntary physical symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. So again, if you imagine that people who were involved in with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, so someone who grew up in a house of abuse, or again, a soldier or a Marine or sailor or airman who goes to Iraq or Afghanistan, and they spend an entire year where their survival system is turned on. Again, our survival system is meant for temporary, momentary systems of fight or flight response. It pushes the adrenaline and cortisol or whatever. It gives us that boost of strength and speed and whatnot. So when you're over there, or again, say if you grew up in a house of abuse and that system is always on, your body is pumping these chemicals. And when you come home, it's still pumping all those chemicals. And so that's why when you come home, you can't turn it off. And you are driving down the side of the road, and you're driving down the road, and everything on the side of the road, your body is reacting to as if it's an IED. You are sitting with your back to the wall because everyone who comes into the room, your body is tensing up like they might be a suicide bomber. Your brain is constantly at night going into your dream cycles and having these tension, anxiety dreams, these nightmares, these night terrors. You're having these night sweats, et cetera, et cetera. Everything is an emergency. Everything is a a big deal because your survival system is stuck on. You knock over a glass of water, and it might as well have been, King Kong might as well be attacking your building type of deal. Your system is turned on. So the nerve block is basically just like a 3-inch needle that the doctor sticks into your neck, into the nerve that's responsible for regulating a lot of these chemicals that your body is producing. And basically, it just has some anesthesia on it, and it, in lay terms, resets it. This particular nerve block, the stellate ganglion nerve block, has been around for about 100 years. It's a pain management treatment. It's used for a variety of different things. And one of the doctors in Chicago, a guy named Eugene Liphoff, who has been pioneering this for the last 5 or 6 years, has really been pushing forward on this. The Department of Defense and the VA are doing studies on this, clinical treatment studies to examine it. I know at least 5 or 6 other guys, along myself, who've had it. It's been very helpful for me. The relief from those involuntary physical symptoms was immediate. Those extra chemicals in my body, that stress, that tension, that feeling of being turned on, right? Like as if, again, I am getting ready to go out on patrol. My body is producing these chemicals, survival chemicals, was turned off. It was this instant relief. I actually have a friend of mine, a friend's wife. I've known her for 20 some odd years. She recently went to go get it. She suffers from PTSD. I'm not sure from what was a traumatic instance, but she went recently, received the nerve block, and she said the first time she's had relief in 20 years as well. Now, it's a temporary solution. I've had to have it 3 times in the last year, and you can tell when the symptoms come back because you start feeling edgier. All of a sudden, you start noticing people more. Your partner or your family or someone will say to you, you're looking around a lot more. Your dreams will start to get a little bit worse or more worse and worse and worse. So you do notice the involuntary physical PTSD symptoms coming back. And like I say, it doesn't do anything for the guilt, doesn't do anything for your depression, doesn't do anything for your substance abuse, doesn't do anything for traumatic brain injury. But for your involuntary PTSD symptoms, it does help, and it has helped me, and it has helped about 5 or 6 other people I know. And from what I've seen on some of the research, helps about 75 or 80% of the people who it's been done on. Again, it's temporary, and it certainly is not a magic bullet. From what the doctors out there in Chicago, who they seem to think that the people it doesn't work for are the people who are still drinking, the people who don't have a good support network, the people who are not receiving professional counseling. So it's just one more tool in the toolbox. You've got to still be doing all the other things. You've got to have a good lifestyle. You've got to be receiving professional therapy. You have to be, not engaged in substance abuse, et cetera, et cetera. But it is something that helps. Now, to your point, Scott, absolutely. And there was a good article on this by Matt Farwell in Rolling Stone last year. Matt wrote about this nerve block, and he talks about how the Navy SEAL teams are getting this done a lot because the team members are able to come home, get this nerve block, be relieved of the tension and stress of the deployment, and then be able to function. So absolutely, for the military, this is terrific. I think in Matt's article, it was referred to as a God shot, because you're able to function. You're able to be done with all that stress, that tension, that extra anxiety.
Yeah. You talk about all the things that it doesn't really address. I could see how that's taken a really big edge off, though, that permanent flinch.
Oh,
if you're not having to suffer through that physically, now maybe you can begin to deal with some of this other crap.
Yeah, absolutely. And Scott, it's really weird, too, when that edge disappears. It's really weird, because you've been living like that for a while with like this tension that becomes your normal. And so when that's gone, you have this period of readjustment of being like, oh yeah, that's what life was like before this constant tension. The first time I remember driving past, something on the highway and I knew, I've been doing this for years, every time driving past something on the highway, and my body just kind of involuntarily tenses up for like a half a second. I can't help that. And I'm used to it. It's not a big deal. That's just what occurs. And my body didn't do it. And it was amazing. It was amazing. And it's a really freeing thing, a really great thing. And it is. It's just one less thing you have to deal with, and very helpful. But again, it's temporary. It's not permanent. How long this last nerve block I had the last one in December, will last for, I don't know. And whether or not it will be accepted into the VA as a official tool of theirs, or official type of healthcare for them. We'll see. It'll take a bunch of years, right, for it to get through all the trials and everything, but hopefully it does, because it has, again, not just myself, but 5 or 6 people I directly know as well then too. The stuff we're seeing in terms of some of the reports on it is that it has been helpful. But again, it's just one element of many things that people need to do.
Yep. All right, listen, so we're a little bit more than an hour here, so we ought to go ahead and wrap it up. But so I'm really sorry. There's no way I'm going to start asking you about Palestine now and give them that short of shrift, or your trip over there. I want to hear all about it. So maybe we can do this again in a week or so.
Yeah,
and talk about what I had you on to talk about.
Sure, that sounds good.
All right, well, at least I can mention this great piece. It's at mondoweiss.net by Matthew Ho. A U.S. veteran reflects on protesting alongside Palestinian human rights activists in Hebron. And it's a very interesting article. I hope you guys will take a look at it, mondoweiss.net. And then we'll have you on next week again to talk about that. But thanks for coming on the show, Matt. Great to talk to you again.
Terrific, Scott. Thank you very much.
All right, so that's Matthew Ho, former Marine, former State Department official. He really did do everything he could to try to stop the surge, the doubling, tripling down of the Afghan war in 2009. Read all about that in the Post and the Times. And he was written for everything. And again, this one is at mondoweiss.net. A U.S. veteran reflects on protesting alongside Palestinian human rights activists in Hebron. That's the Scott Horton Show. Find all my stuff at scotthorton.org/interviews for the interviews/show. For the questions and answers stuff, use the hashtag SHSQA if you want to ask me stuff. And follow me on Twitter at Scott Horton Show. Thanks, y'all. Hey, you own a business? Maybe we should consider advertising on the show. See if we can make a little bit of money. My email address is scott@scotthorton.org. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here. It's always safe to say that one should keep at least some of your savings in precious metals as a hedge against inflation. And if this economy ever does heat back up and the banks start expanding credit, rising prices could make metals a very profitable bet. Since 1977, Robertson Roberts Brokerage Inc. has been helping people buy and sell gold, silver, platinum, and palladium, and they do it well. They're fast, reliable, and trusted for more than 35 years. And they take Bitcoin. Call Robertson Roberts at 1-800-874-9760 or stop by rrbi.co.